What are your sweetest tales of revenge, first hand or witnessed? Was working graveyard shift at a diner. And it was just me and this total lich of a waitress. It's slow and some kitchen workers from across the street drop by. So I fix them some food and me and the waitress play cards with them and chat it up. She was insulting me all night. So I fired back an insult and out of nowhere she punches me in the eye. It wasn't a full-on punch. But it was hard enough for me to be pissed. And I just knew she was one of those girls that does it because she's a girl and those guys aren't going to hit her back. Plus I was pissed that she did it in front of people, making me look like a punk. Later on in the shift she asks me to make her a waffle. So I make her a damn fine looking waffle. I cut it in half. Spread about a handful of mayonnaise on the inside and then sandwich it back carefully to look normal. I gave it to her then sat in a booth nearby pretending to read the paper while she spent 10 minutes spreading butter on it and cutting it up into nice little pieces. She walks back into the kitchen to get syrup and while she does, I run up and pour a handful of salt into her milk and stir it up real quick. She comes back, takes a bite of waffle, spits it out, then tries washing the taste out with milk and ends up nearly puking. She didn't say shit to me after that. TLDR, never duck with people who prepare your food. I lived in a huge loft complex in Atlanta. Some of my neighbors were ducking assholes who had no regard for anyone else, so late one night, I squirted KY jelly all over the floor at their end of the hallway. It was super shiny and black, and listen to the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. When I was in high school we had this one kid that was on the autistic spectrum somewhere. He was very awkward and self-absorbed. His younger brother had similar, but not as intense behaviors. We'll just call the older boy Danny. Anyway, Danny had an obsession with picking up change. People picked up on it and started tossing out coins around him and watching him scramble under people or tables at lunch and whatnot. The brother tried to take up for him but couldn't. This went on for a while and escalated. It got to the point where these rednecks were bringing rolls of change just to roll at this kid, and we're not talking pennies either. I heard some guys were rolling quarters around. So one day they are doing this and they roll 5-6 coins out. The vice principal, imagine the human version of Bear in the Big Blue House, comes up and tells the kids to buzz off and stop doing that. Well, Danny look up at the principal and tells him it's okay. I've saved up and bought a PS2. The amazing thing here was this kid was poor at a poor school and this was right at the time where PS2s had just come out and were expensive. On top of that, I had lunch with the kid and he ate like a king. We're talking $4-6 in a la carte food every day. Also, funny thing is, many of those idiots that laughed at him were in his remedial classes and probably did worse in school than he did. TL. Dr. Jerks threw coins at a poor autistic kid who was obsessed with picking it up. He saved up and bought a just released PS2 and still ate like royalty at lunch. I once came home from school to find 3 donuts sitting on the table. My mom had obviously left them out as a snack for my 2 sisters and I. Needless to say, I ate 2 of them. My father was not happy when he found out. He sent me to my room and instructed me to write my sister an apology. I typed a long and elaborate note of regret. I vowed never again to look at tasty pastries through rose-colored glasses. The note had a fancy letterhead and everything. I left it on her pillow when I was done. When she came home and found it, she couldn't stop laughing. She showed it to my mother, and she started laughing as well. My father was very upset that I had made a joke out of his punishment, but nobody else cared. Freshman year in high school my locker was next to a very nice girl, but her sophomore boyfriend was a huge douche-up. Every day after lunch, when we went to our lockers to get our books for the next few classes, he would snap my bra. The first 20 or so times it was just an annoyance, so I kept telling him nicely to stop. As time progressed I stopped asking nicely and told him the next time he did it, he'd be sorry. So the next day after lunch, he snapped my bra again. And it was the last straw. I always had my lock dangle from my pinky as I closed my locker. So when I popped him one upside the head, Not only was it the force of my punch, but the added oomph of the lock hitting him right in the temple. Since it was the heat of the moment, I didn't even realize the lock was still in my hand when I clocked him. He was knocked flat on his back and had a cut on his eyebrow. I was terrified that he would report the incident to the principal. But it was too much of an embarrassment for a sophomore boy to admit he'd been beaten up by a freshman girl. Either that, or he knew he had it coming. From my coworker. The dorm that I lived in while in college was a fairly small dorm that was supposed to focus on arts and philosophy. There were around 102 residents, and every semester we hosted coffee house events where people would put on various artistic performances. People sang, danced, played music and told stories. One day this fellow named Sam got up to tell a story. Since it was a small dorm, everyone knew that he had had a rough month previously. He and his girlfriend were having problems. He was a triple major, and while this meant he was always busy, this particular semester had been very hard. Apparently one night he had decided to take a break, go to the on-campus convenience stores and pay the absurd markup on ice cream. Once he had eaten his feel-good portion, he put the rest in the freezer with the expectation that he would have the remainder with which to pick himself up the next day. Unfortunately, when he went back the next day, his ice cream was gone. So at coffee house, Sam gets up to tell his tale of woe. Everyone has had this happen to him, so they are fully sympathetic. But then he explains that he doesn't care that someone stole his ice cream. You see, he then explained that he suspected someone would steal his delicious pick-me-up and had therefore indulged in another form of stress relief before putting the ice cream into the freezer. He jerked off and jizzed into his ice cream before he put it in the freezer. Everyone thought this was hysterical. Everyone except the guy who started screaming, "That's not funny. That's not funny. I guess we know who ate the ice cream." TLDR, college kid jizzed an ice cream eaten by thief. Out in the city. After an evening of drinking, my friends and I usually end up at a late night pizza place. There isn't usually much seating inside and it's hot, so sometimes we will buy a slice and eat outside. On this particular night, these two dudes and a girl were getting into a cab nearby, and right before they step in, they call one of the girls we were with some names referring to her size. The gentleman we were with, standing up for their lady friend, say something along the lines of "Say that to our faces," or "Excuse me, what did you say?" The a-holes yell "Sheet" out their cab window as it pulls away, but then get stuck at the next light. So our gentleman friends run down the street, try to open their doors, to no avail. But the girl's window was open, so they smashed a slice of pizza on her face. TDLR, jerks make fun of our friend and get pizza faced. Short and sweet version. I got blackout drunk and slept on a friend's couch. I woke up the next morning with 2 lines shaved into my eyebrow. I later found out he did it with his pube trimmer. I waited 8 months for my revenge. One night, after he slept with a random from the bar, I put Bengay on all his underwear he left in the dryer. He left work early the next day because he thought he had an STD. Edit, spelling. I went to a big high school. Huge. So the amount of brick this guy was has to have been colossal for him to stand out to me. Anyway, said brick grabbed the microphone from the school news team and runs down the hallway with it like a goofy, giggling tool. The kid who was interviewing another student starts off after him, but the asshead is running at a full gallop and probably has a good 50 feet on him. As he's passing this random group of people, this leg comes out and trips him. I have never seen someone eat it as hard as he did. His leg flew up over his head and the shape of his body roughly resembled a sea, or a cooked jumbo shrimp if you care to think of it that way. He slid in this position for what seemed to be 15 to 100 feet. His earring was ripped clean out of his ear. His backpack exploded, dumping his worldly possessions all around him in a 10-foot radius. One of his shoes seemingly vanished into thin air or was sucked into an interdimensional rift created by his own douchebaggery. When he stood up, his face was nearly smoking from the friction burn created between the beating of his stupid face and the cheap, vomit-proof carpet they used to line the halls. I never found out whose foot that was. I'd like to think Batman was there that day at my school. Yeah. My buddy's ex cheated on him by blowing like 3 guys at a party. I know. Disgusting, right? So we had to make the punishment fit the crime by being just as disgusting. We spent about $300 on earthworms between all the fishing shops within an hour radius of our homes. This girl lived on the ground floor. It really couldn't have been easier. We just slipped open her window and in went the worms. Bucket after bucket. Needless to say, she woke up the next morning less than pleased and always knew it was us but could never really do anything about it. Skanky itch. Some girl in one of my classes last year used campus email to spam the entire class with her website. I responded to her and asked her not to send me these emails anymore. She was a complete itch about it. So I took her address and subscribed to over 3,000 newsletters. This is oddly close to something that happened to me a couple of days ago. Our resident director for my on-campus housing is too retarded to use BCC when he emails us. So 450 emails are visible to each other when he sends something out. Some chick decided to abuse that by advertising some bullshit to all of our campus emails. Anyway, what's the most efficient way to subscribe such person to 3,000 newsletters? Truth store. I work at a grocery store and being a cashier bagger I see some pretty weird customers. However, some of the weird ones you see turn out to be thieves. Well, one day I was out helping with carts because we were getting slammed and practically every cart was being used. Anyways, I see a shady looking man hauling some seriouses out of the store with a purse in his hand. And a woman chasing after him with a kid in her arms telling him to stop. Well, considering I was the only thing between him and his escape, I figured I had to do something. He comes running directly at me. Mind you, he's about 5'6" and rather skinny and I'm 6'2". I act like I'm gonna let him pass. But as soon as he does, I grabbed his arm and yanked back as hard as I could and he came completely horizontal from the yank and lands flat on his face, knocking him out cold. Needless to say, he wakes up in handcuffs. And I got to go home early. Win scenario. My father was slaughtered by a 6-fingered man. He was a great swordmaker. My father. When a 6-fingered man appeared and requested a special sword, my father took the job. He slaved a year before it was done. The 6-fingered man returned and demanded it. But at 1/10 his promised price. My father refused. Without a word. The 6-fingered man slashed him through the heart. I loved my father. So naturally, I challenged his mare dare her to duel. I failed. The 6-fingered man left me alive. But he gave me a scar on each cheek. I was 11 years old. And when I was strong enough, I dedicated my life to the study of fencing. So, when we finally met, I went up to the 6-fingered man and said, "Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." Then I stabbed him into a table. There were 2 guys in high school that gave me shit for being gay. 2 of my girlfriends had an extra ticket to a Backstreet Boys concert. I was not a big fan. Despite being gay, I am not a stereotype. Anyway, I went since it was something to do. 2 rows back and over about a dozen columns there are the wrestling boys. Alone. Together at a BSB concert. We said hi to them and they never said another word to me again after that day. Not really revenge. But a great moment either way. A friend of mine had what he claimed was a bogus traffic ticket. Quite frankly, I suspect his ticket was well deserved and a long time coming. He was not a very safe driver. But he claims he was caught in a speed trap. And the location on the ticket matched it. He was considering fighting the traffic ticket. And googled the name of the citing officer. A few links later, he's discovered, through the miracle of social networking, that the officer has a wife who doesn't know about the officer's, girlfriend. Needless to say, my friend made sure that the wife found out. He never did fight the ticket. And has actually become a bit safer driver in the meantime. I can't speak to whether the traffic ticket was deserved or not. Or whether the officer was a good man or not. Adultery aside. TLDR, I shot Mr. Burns and framed a baby. When I was 18 I had an asshole supervisor at a call center IT job. He would constantly walk by my desk giving me dirty looks and look for mistakes in any of my work. He changed my schedule for me to come in at an earlier time, and the first couple of days because of traffic I was late and he fired me. Fast forward to 2 years later. My current supervisor at a new job asked me to do a favor and work some extra hours to cover someone's shift. As I'm leaving for the day I see my supervisor finishing a job interview for the guy at my previous job. I cashed in the favor he owed me instantly and he ripped up the guy's resume and threw it away. That day convinced me that karma was real. I lived on a pretty quiet street with a little side street too next to my neighbor's house. At the bottom of that street live a house with about 5-6 young guys that dealt drugs, verified. Not rumor. They always rode these shitty, loud scooters up and down the street at all hours. We had called the cops. etc to no avail. I got a bucket and filled it with a grit from a defunct cinder block factory near our neighborhood, the dry material before the blocks were made. It was grey, hard and spherical, about the size of a BB and smaller. I poured the grit on the street pavement in the intersection of the two streets. It was like ball bearings. The first one of the scooters hit that sheet and slid about 30 feet into the curbing. They got off and walked the scooters through the turn after that, and ended up moving about a week later. Funny as hell to hear that scooter grinding across the pavement when it hit that turn. There was this one guy in my high school. Legit racist. He wouldn't physically do anything but was very verbal about it. Everyone knew it but never really said anything. Except it was getting worse and worse. Grade 12 a black girl stops coming to school and he didn't same time. School didn't know where either were. Nobody connected either of them together. Apparently he beat the hell out of her and she said his name before losing consciousness. The cops were holding him but had to release him after she wasn't coming to. No real evidence to prove it was him. After all, he wore gloves in the winter. The school gets wind of it and wasn't sure what to do. He comes back to school is basically bragging about it without necessarily admitting it. The next weekend he gets real drunk. He's then on the road driving. He finds a black trucker and tells him. He evidently drives up beside the transport truck to teach the black trucker to steal white jobs. While he's driving 75 km/h or so, he leans out the driver's window with a baseball bat while driving with his knees and starts to damage the transport truck. The passenger apparently just does nothing to stop this. Eventually they drive right into pole. Racist duck died. The passenger at least gave the cops every little detail. Okay, that's the backstory. So at school their response to this. They decide to do end racism pledge thing where people would sign it and such. In his honor because he was the leading image of anti-racism and we should be all like him. We then sent like 1,000 signatures and letters and other stuff to the parents. It was either the worst troll ever or the people who thought of the idea hadn't heard the real story.